Yo, this is Steve Bloom, and you're watching Moana Nui Podcast. We'll be starting soon. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Veronica Taylor, and from myself and Ash Ketchum, I just want to say, Moana Nui, I choose you!
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining the Moana Nui podcast. We're so glad to have you part of this upcoming episode we're having for our 7 o'clock hour. But before we get into our episode, I have a couple announcements that I would like to give, and we'll go right into introductions. Of course, that we have a few indie projects on Kickstarter that we will love for you to support. We have Infography, Black woman-owned company, indie company, is having a Kickstarter for their new candy bags. They are super adorable. They're on their last few days, so definitely check them out. Give some support to make this happen to everyone, and you will find the link to their Kickstarter in your comments to go and support their candy bags. We also have William White. He has a new comic coming out called Super Suspense Stories on Kickstarter. Definitely give that a check, that one out. It has a Black Latina as the lead for that series, so definitely check out that series right there. The link to his Kickstarter is also in the comment section, so definitely give your support for that one. And if you are a D&D fan, Unlikely Heroes have their new 5e adventure called The Sunderling. Their Kickstarter is going on right now. You can go to Kickstarter to support their upcoming adventure that you can support. That link is also in the comment section, so definitely give your support if you like D&D. And also we have our friend at Indie Comics Dispatch, Brent Hilsham. It has a new Kickstarter for his comic Immortalized #1. Definitely go and give that support for that particular comic also. And that link is also in your comics. And last but not least, Dorsey, and here's our sis Moana right here, and Dorsey Jean newest project is has a new project I'm excited about, based on the historical Haitian hero. So definitely check out that Kickstarter too. That's going to be another one that you can learn a little history with the storytelling in that series, and that link is also in your comment section. Now,
Yes.
let us also introduce. Now we have our sis on there. If you're new to watching the Moana Nui podcast, first, aloha to you, and welcome to the show. I'll kick it off and say, I am Dana. I am the other half of the Moana Nui podcast. I'm also a con staff and event and cosplay photographer. I do a little bit of event planning. I'm also a voice actor, and a whole lot more. But of course, we got to hand it over to the Renaissance woman of our time, the person that is the founder of the Moana New podcast, the backbone behind a lot of indie projects you may or may not know about. And we'll also see her speaking at the upcoming FSK Con in September. We'll hand it over to my sis, the lovely, the beautiful Moana.
Hi, sis. Hello, aloha, everybody. Sorry I'm a little late today, running a bit behind from work, but it's good to see everybody. I'm glad Dana was able to give some highlights of the projects that we have coming in our community. I'm really excited about Matandal, who is the Haitian hero. I talked with
Yes.
East about that one. I don't know, it's probably 2 or 3 years ago now, and I'm so happy to see that finally coming to fruition. But I definitely want to welcome our guest today. She was actually one of our backers for our Shadows of the Ancient Kickstarter, and we talked a little bit along the way as the project was progressing. And so I'm really excited to have her come on the show. Let's see, Dana, did you already do her introduction? I don't have it.
Not yet.
Okay, do you mind?
I will go ahead and kick off the introduction. Erin Waters is the Director of Equitable Programs and Services at Black and Beyond, the Binary Collective. She is also the owner and lead at Blacklily Consulting. Her work revolves around being an educator and advocate for marginalized communities with a particular focus on LGBTQ plus communities of color. She has held roles ranging from community health worker in small nonprofit clinics to equity consultant at large scale healthcare organizations like Kaiser Permanente. Growing up on comic books, she continues to build spaces where marginalized folks can embrace joy through gaming and storytelling. That's something we love about on this show. And furthering the conversation on how marginalized folks can work together to build stronger networks that allow us to find our own sovereignty and artistic liberation while acknowledging the historic and systematic challenges many communities face. Uh, and with that, I am very excited to welcome our guest, Miss Erin Waters. Welcome, Erin.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. How's it going?
We are doing good. Me and Erin had a great conversation right before we got started, and of course,
Already
it's
got into
Friday
it.
Eve. So what better to get ready for the weekend, but to be part of the Moana Nui podcast today and to hear the story and all the amazing things Erin is doing in the community. So with that, Erin, of course, with our show, we always like to kick things off and start the show with the Pico or your origin story. Tell us a
Okay.
little bit about yourself and where you are from.
Sure. So I definitely started off in the East Coast of the United States, in between DC and Baltimore, which was a really, really interesting place to kind of grow up. Anytime I wanted to find out what was happening in terms of politics, I could literally go down to the mall and talk to someone from a new or a different place. I learned a lot about corn subsidies one summer. Um, I guess there were some bills associated with it, and I met some folks from the Midwest. So as I was growing up, the main thing that I was really interested in was how I could be not personally expressive, but how I could support other people doing it. I'm into martial arts. I love watching things. I'm not a visual artist. Sometimes I wish I had the tenacity. You just have to draw and draw and draw. But I realized that developing a deep knowledge of how these things worked, how these industries worked, and how people were engaging was really what interested me. And I was fortunate because my stepdad would let me buy all the complicated comics from the back of the comic book store. And I grew up in a town that was really just getting over restrictive covenants in the 80s. And so my family, with a white stepfather, black mother, I am lighter than my sister. So it seemed as though there was this automatic story all of these people already knew about this woman who had multiple babies and this white man taking care of her. So, I mean, I lived in a place where the first time I was called the N-word was I was 7 years old. So understanding some of that context was challenging for me, and the escape that comics brought was great because I knew that the kids who got into fights with me, it wasn't their fault, right? It was the people around them. And
Is she frozen on your end? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's frozen because I was looking like, hopefully it's just me.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you are. Okay,
Sweet.
You froze for a little bit.
sorry. Living life out on a small farm. It is what it is. But yeah, so I needed the escape, and the escape really came from the art that was around me. And I really wanted the people around me to produce more of it, to be supportive. I collected the comic book cards for a long time, Marvel Masterpiece Series 93 and 94, all day, every day. And I remember falling in love with my local comic book store because I had been collecting and getting all of these packs. And so all the people knew me. I was missing one card. And they had decided to put the entire, I think it was the 94 Marvel Masterpieces up on the wall. I was missing one card from it, and they had one card in that slot. And I did not know what to do. I was like, well, I guess I'll just buy a few more packs. And the staff member just took it out and said, you know what? Here, just take it. And so I found this moment of feeling really supported because he was this giant white guy, to be completely honest with you. And I had not talked with him a lot, so outside of some basic register stuff. And so I could tell already that he was already in a space where he was trying to build a bridge. I was nervous about coming into the store. I tried to get in and out really, really quickly. And so because of that, I felt more comfortable coming back, starting to stay. And through him, I actually got to learn a lot about how challenging the comic book industry was, how Image was on the rise and was going to take over everything. He firmly believed it then, late 90s. He could see the writing, or actually more like early mid 90s. He could see the writing on the wall around Marvel's and DC's upcoming challenges as they move towards the change of the millennium. And so I really felt like I had an opportunity to see what art could look like from the side of the retailers, from the side of the fans, and how I could build something a little bit different while I was escaping these really unfortunate and complicated experiences that I was having on a day-to-day basis in a neighborhood full of people who weren't really interested in getting to know me as a person, and had kind of written my story for me. So beyond that, eventually, we all grow up, right? And I realized that something that had been going on in me since I was about 7 was no longer something that I could hide. It was not something that I could let go of. And the way I actually found it was through researching gender nonconforming people, queer people, and finding them around the globe throughout history. I developed a lot of respect for the Pacific Islander community because I learned about Samoa and Tonga and how they've had these long traditions of these folks who meet these ideas that English speakers or Americans might see as transgender or queer. But there was a whole culture and language and experience around it. And I could tap into my own and find myself that way. And so it was really looking to other communities of color to see how they had embraced some of these folks and how it didn't matter what culture I was in, there were definitely people out there, and there was definitely a space in society and culture to be who we are. And after I came out, y'all, the healthcare for us was terrible 6 years ago. It was bad. And so I went to visit some friends, and they took me to this talk, and these two trans guys were talking about trans healthcare and the challenges that they were having and how they were trying to advocate. And oh my goodness, one of them was ready to get into, it felt like he was ready to get into a fist fight for trans rights. And the passion that he was able to exude really, really challenged me in a way to, I quit my job. I was early in transition, but I went to go work for a nonprofit healthcare space that was known for supporting trans and queer people so that I could find my community. I could find my folks living under the poverty line because far too many of us do. those overrepresentations. And so I knew I was going to be able to find my people. I was going to find my melanated folks. I was going to find my working class folks. I was going to find all of us and get an opportunity to provide something fundamental and important, which was healthcare. And after that, I just kept doing it. I'm sure y'all know, if you're polite and a little erudite, folks will ask you to explain more about your culture and your people. And by proxy, they want you to, well, tell me what BIPOC means, and as if we could condense it so simply. And so I got to a point where I was like, really, just pay me. If we're doing it anyway, right? Like, if we're being asked to bring these stories to light, if we're being asked to build these bridges, what can we do to make sure we are feeling sustained, we are feeling safe, and that we have control over our own story, ourselves, our lives, our spaces, and how we are able to build networks with other people, because we don't act in isolation. And so that's a lot of how I learned about intersectionality, was honestly through my engagement. We have an organization in the Portland area called Utopia PDX, and they work pretty explicitly with the Pacific Islander queer community, Cutie Pies. And, it has been an amazing experience to get to know people from that specific community, because I, as a Black person who was raised in the suburbs, I didn't have an initial connection. It was really what we consumed in the media. A lot of stuff. I have Navy family. They had thoughts about Hawaii and things along those lines, and parts of Indonesia. And it was on me to kind of learn some of the truth around that. And I was really fortunate that a friend from the Philippines was able to introduce me to some folks who expanded a lot of my horizons, because it's still really challenging for us to find community without having to go get that community. We still have to play whack-a-mole. If you want to find the Chicano community, you have to go find the Chicano community. Yeah. And it's because we build these spaces to make ourselves safe. So I have felt fortunate that I get to do this work, that folks feel like I can speak with them and speak about them and advocate for them. That feels like a gift. I spent a bunch of time in our local protest community. I can't keep my mouth shut, y'all. I just, one way or another. So that's kind of it. That's what I got. That's kind of what I got as an overview of who I am and how I got to where I am today.
Well, as we know in Georgia, one of our, may he rest in peace, his favorite saying is, good trouble. Mm-hmm. You're one about the good trouble.
Mm-hmm. It's important. We have to be able to have a conversation about social, political, ideological, community advancement. And it is complicated because if we get down to brass tacks, Dr. King was not shot until he was fighting against capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. You can argue for race equity all you want, but the moment you go after the system, you try and work around it, that's when they want to get you. And so I really appreciate things like Kickstarter, things like Backer Kit, because it provides an opportunity for us to do what? Move around it, right? Mm-hmm. Finding Kickstarter was, I dragged tail. I'm not going to lie, y'all. I dragged tail on it. I've probably only been on Kickstarter a couple years now. But seeing how the barrier was being broken down for me to find so many different stories, because I am honestly tired of reading the same 6 stories about mostly white superheroes. Mm-hmm. The same 6 fantasy novels about I don't know what you call a male Mary Sue, but they certainly do have a lot of those, but they don't ever call it out like that. And so I'm always looking for, again, that opportunity to find space and time to uplift other people, to support their work. And Kickstarter really made that easy for me. And I have young people in my life. I really want them to grow up with a wider view and perspective than I had. And it wasn't that my parents had a narrow one. It's that my mom was trying to make it in this town and keep her child from being hurt.
Right.
And so the world gets boiled down a little bit to brass tacks when you think about what's important. And, descendants of slaves, we don't have a direct connection to part of our culture. And so instead it becomes, well, how do we focus on surviving this one? And so I feel, again, like I said, I feel fortunate that we have these tools, we have these opportunities, getting to poke around in Kickstarter, finding Black artists, brown artists, Pacific Islander folks, Desi folks. I never really thought it would be so easy. at a certain point. That isn't to say fees aren't a problem, and that, you know, there are still these barriers to doing these things.
Yes.
But the seeing folks succeed makes me so happy. Seeing us succeed makes me so happy. And I honestly will do what I can to continue to promote that, whether it's from the org I work with. We do housing, we do mental health support, we have a youth leadership program, whether it's in the street, providing mutual aid. We grow extra food where I live so that we can give it away. We advocate in large institutions, doing this side hustle work with Blacklily. So, you know, I'm trying to do everything I can to do that work in the light, because otherwise the conversation becomes harder, right? Like, we know what happens when the lights go out. There was definitely an assumption around Portland, Oregon, and how it worked during the protest season, and people really made it out to be this huge thing. But where does the power of the people come from? You know, it's where are you having these conversations, in the light or after dark? And there are so many of us who are trying to make that peaceable transition, that desire, that opportunity to do it politely, because I don't want to see anybody hurt. I don't want to see anyone struggle, but we have to be able to elevate the conversation. A lot of the 2020 stuff, people learned about race, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about Black people until Asian folks started being attacked. We are suddenly understanding climate justice, and we can talk about Indigenous Americans from North America, but we are not talking about how Hawaii is unceded land that the United States acknowledged is unceded land, and they're just not going to give it back. And if we are playing whack-a-mole, if we have to queue up and get in line for these freedoms, this understanding, if we're doing it one at a time, when are smaller communities going to get the support that they need, you know? And so expanding that conversation, trying to turn intersectionality into something more than just a layering of identities, into the systems of advantage and disadvantage that are at play. And that's hard for some people, you know, because I feel like it's really unfortunate that, so Dana and I were talking a little bit earlier about the connection between the Asian and the Black community when it comes to protesting, and how that's complicated, and how, you know, Yellow Peril was a complicated thing when it came to the Black Panthers. But it doesn't change the fact that when protests started, I saw my Asian community out there. And I was really pleased in the Portland area to see the Pacific Islander community be cohesive enough to talk for themselves and not have to be lumped in with everyone else. Yes. Yes. It was awesome. Having enough of a network and community here to be able to do that, to control your own narrative, and seeing the authentic work that we've been able to do to try and build connection between one another. I've just felt like I live in a place where it's kind of unique. You know, I'm not in it. Portland's technically a big city. Y'all, it's the smallest big city ever.
Yes,
and
it is.
It's like the whitest big city ever. And, you know, these are facts. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of different types of people here. And so we do get the opportunity to, like, if we want to expand the conversation around climate justice, we can talk about how islands are literally disappearing. Because that's a new part of the conversation for a lot of people. We can talk about Indigenous folks, but if we're talking about Pacific Islanders, where they're not in the conversation,
right?
Yes.
They're just not. And so I as I do my work, I'm constantly pounding on people like this whack-a-mole approach. It's great that you're understanding a little bit of Blackness or what it means to be Black, but like the good Asian mythos has to be deconstructed as well.
Yes.
Because there are Asian folks who aren't rich or have a ton of family who are supporting them. Asian seniors are not part of any conversation around seniors in any of the places that I've seen. And so how do you build community when you've lost your partner? Your family is harder to contact and you need support. We don't have places for us to go. We have to rely, as often as we do, we have to rely on the goodness of the white folks who run these institutions to hopefully treat us well, and that our family can advocate for us. The lack of respect for our elders that we are forced to kind of endure. So many communities of color don't carry that. It's something that we've had to honestly learn how to adapt to because of the way the systems function here. And our intergenerational households haven't been as strong. So these are some of the things that I try and talk about, and it really depends on the organization. You know, if I'm talking to healthcare, we're talking about how do you change your system to be able to capture trans identities? How do you use demographic information more effectively? How do you make your staff stop whining about having to use translation services? Let it go. It's got to happen. And academic institutions, you know, we have to be able to talk not just about a school to prison pipeline, but about how queer students are coming out in those collegiate spaces, and what we can do to provide not just support, but visibility, because some folks really need that. They need to know that they're not the only ones.
Yeah.
And figuring out how do we build that bridge? How do we take one student union, or Dana and I were talking about business resource groups or employee resource groups at different companies. How do we build that bridge? You know, we used to do a lot of work with our African American Professional Association when I was working at Kaiser. We did quite a bit of work with APANA, which is another Asian Pacific Islander organization in our town. And so we tried to do as much as we could in terms of our ERG, working with other people to show where not just the intersection lies, but how our struggle is really bound up in one another. Because that's the point, that's the place we're trying to get to. How all of these little steps we need to take for some of us can benefit all of us. And that's hard. You know, a lot of people feel like wokeness is being shoved down their throat, or they're forced to deal with X, Y, and Z. And I don't really understand that, because on any given day, I can find 100 new movies and half a dozen new books, all full of white people. Just full of white people and white stories. Never have a problem with that. But if I ask for something different, that's when I'm the problem, right? Yes. That's when I'm the one who has to figure something out for myself, who has to do something different. And sometimes we get tired of being the change we want to see in the world, right?
Thank you.
Like I don't want to have to rebuild every daggone system.
Right.
But sometimes we do. Mm-hmm. And that's the situation that we're put. Yeah, I see you, Moana. I saw that. Sorry. It's tough, you know, and so some companies are trying to do well, some aren't. I was telling Dana earlier what happened when the time came for us to learn about Black folks and people who are living marginalized existences and being discriminated against. We dumped billions of dollars into the feelings of white people.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
That's what the DEI stuff is.
Correct.
And what do we do with that? Like, did that change anything? Not really. We're not seeing some change. We are seeing some grassroots change with some individuals who are moving differently. Trying to touch that systemic level, moving past the individual stuff and talking about how we deal with these systems that were never made with us in mind.
Yes.
And how disrespectful it is for people to be bringing their identity from their culture, their place in society from their culture here, and to have it completely erased.
Yes.
To not even, like, we don't have the words for you. We're going to force other labels onto you, and we're going to force the assumptions that come along with it, and the station in society that you should supposedly have because of your identity. And these are the themes that I see pulled out in our stories, right? I don't want to see more slave narratives of Black folks, not gonna lie. I'm done with that. I'm over that. But if it's that joy piece, where are we finding joy? I really appreciated the book associated with this Kickstarter, because that's going to some young people in my life who are really excited to have more people who look more like them.
Yes.
Because they don't look like the kids that they go to school with or in their preschool. And if we don't give our own an opportunity, then if we don't get the equal access to opportunity, then that's where we start to struggle, right? Folks are convinced that what we're asking for is equality and outcome, and that's not the case at all. We're talking about equality and access and respect along the way.
Yeah, equality and equity are two different things.
Yeah,
exactly. Now, of course, Erin, you brought up about, your Blacklily Consulting. And when you go to your website, you offer an array of services to groups, organizations, and companies. What are some of the services that people should consider for their workplace?
Okay. So you have to figure out what type of baby steps are going to work for your organization. I personally abhor baby steps, but they're all we have sometimes. And if that's all you have, you work with your reality. The first thing that you can do that is relatively low cost and low human power hours is policy review. So are your policies supportive of your Black and brown staff? Because a lot of organizations, for example, are learning about queer staff. We need to make sure we have coverage for the queer community, domestic partner coverage. But as much as we can say, come to work and be yourself if you're queer or you're trans, Black and brown folks aren't hearing that the same way.
Right.
So, you know, it's this really weird dichotomy, and to sit at that intersection and be able to hear that so clearly and to realize, well, you're saying that because more people look like you. So let's look at your policies to see who is being left out, because it is almost undoubtedly that these policies were created by white folks in power who had control. I mean, we can even look at something like business attire. What does that mean? Who decided that?
But especially natural hair being against the law for many states for many years.
So these locks are mine. They're 22 years old. They go down past my butt. And I moved from the East Coast, the South and the East Coast, to Portland because I needed to make sure no one was going to make me cut my hair for work.
Yes.
And I was part of, we actually called it the Crown Act. In Oregon, we passed a law, and they used my story around making sure that no one can make you cut your hair at work. I was there when I was in Georgia when the Alabama case came through where they made that Black woman cut her hair. Because if you want to work here, you have to cut your hair. We can deny you a job if you don't. And I'm just like, what? There are so many cultures that pride themselves on their hair. So many. And what are you doing? And they know what they're doing. They're trying to create this assimilation thing, and they want us to assimilate. And they demonize the fact that we've managed to keep any of our culture here. And people get confused when I'm in a room. So if you want to talk to your folks and you have a business and you're in a meeting, who isn't there? You know, if you're looking at your policies, you're trying to figure out who isn't there. Well, is this just a C-suite meeting? Why? Is there no one from a lower level? When was the last time you brought someone from the front line in? So I'll use healthcare as an example. When was the last time you brought a frontline person working a registration desk into a meeting with C-list folks? Have you ever?
When was the last time you brought an executive assistant who knows everything about the company in?
It's this misplaced. They lose out on resources because they already have people who are there who want to do this work. And so instead they want to pull together a diversity committee. Right. If you have a diversity committee, you don't build one of those unless there is a clear plan for what their scope of power is.
Yes.
And how C-suite is going to implement the things that they're saying. Another example that I use, so we often try and do focus groups in the business world, right? Every 2 years, we want the people that we've harmed, the people that we've disrespected or ignored to pour out their sad story for us so that we can self-actualize and pick the cheapest thing, the fastest thing, and the thing that'll get us the most PR. And those are the only 3 things we're going to do. And then in 2 years, we're going to ask you to pour out your story again.
Yeah.
Don't pull one of those together unless you've got a 51% rule as a minimum. 51% of the suggestions that this group makes have to be implemented. And that's your bottom line. That's your floor. And sometimes something is it's very costly. Its scale is real big, or we have to start small. But that 51% rule is going to make sure you're walking into that space with a different mindset. The best thing to do is, are you walking in with a 51% rule and a check in your hand to give people? Not a table full of cold cutlets and some sandwiches.
And some cold pizza.
Thank you for your participation in our focus group. Yeah, none of that. If you're committed to change, you're gonna invest in it, right? Just like anything else with a business or an organization.
Right.
And look for your volunteers and your BRGs, your ERGs who are there first, because pulling together, making people who are just trying to come to work, do what's in their job position and go home, also defend their identity to people is messy. It's messy. Only the folks who are volunteering for that need to do it. And I feel pretty strongly about that because I realized very early on in my activism work, no one can show up for the work the same ways, right? There are ways that I can benefit the movement. There are ways that other people can benefit the movement. And if I start to expect people to show up in the ways that I do, then that's gonna cause some problems, right? I have to be able to meet people where they're at. We have to be able to understand that what they offer is valuable and unique, whatever that might be, and go from there together. The number of times a business has asked me for like one or two things that they get that 51% rule, paying people in your focus groups and focusing your energy in terms of your diversity work on the people who've already volunteered to do it, because they're going to be there, and let them use staff time. Like, this is not something they're doing on evenings or weekends.
Right.
Okay, your supervisor knows that once a week, once every couple of weeks, you're going to be out for 2 to 3 hours so that you can work on these things. And we talk about the liberatory justice mindset or liberatory consciousness. We start with that awareness piece, which is what every business wants, but then they want to jump into action. Don't let them do that. How many times do we end up with sense of urgency? We're going to do something to try and help the most people we can, which is going to be what? White people, cis people. That's what's going to happen. Hetero folk, that's because they want to help the most folks possible. We have to slow down, and we have to find a way to back up so that we can actually take advantage of the opportunity of doing it right the first time. And
like
if we're going to do that,
move fast, but
yes,
it's not fast, but agile. You got to plan. You're moving efficiently instead of inefficient.
Yeah, I mean, like, how are you gonna, what is it they say in the corporal, build the plane as you fly it? Like, how are you gonna do that?
I hear that all the time.
Right, that corporate speak. Oh my gosh, it's a language.
My plane is broken. It ain't flying.
Right, it's not going anywhere until you get me low.
This duct tape is only holding so much.
Right.
That's the thing, and then they get mad when we call out the duct tape. Right.
Yes.
I see this. We see this. The liberatory consciousness, once you get awareness, you move into analysis. You need to get into the history. You need to understand the structural systemic issues. You need to understand what these folks are asking for. Go on Twitter, find people. Don't ask your brown friends who to follow on Twitter. Figure that out yourself. Just like we had to. We have to figure out who in our own community is vibing with us and working with the same desires that we are. Do the same thing and work it out. And choose to remember, you probably shouldn't trust your first or your second instinct. You need to dig a little deeper.
Yes.
Get into a place where you understand accountability. Don't start doing work you're not going to finish. Those of us who've been here. Excuse me. We will continue to be here. And if we are not able to rely on additional folks coming to the table with what they have, we're going to burn out. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And so with no accountability plan, what's your accountability to make sure you're moving in the right directions, the way the people are saying they want us to move? You hear the term land back. Do you understand the context and the nuance of what that means versus someone who is in the Pacific Northwest, the plains, on an island to the west of this? And what is west? What is west of the United States? How we center ourselves and how we can expand beyond that. So moving from awareness to analysis to accountability, and then into action. The action has to be that last step once you have all of those other pieces. Otherwise, you're going to do something that is ultimately harmful. It's something that you're going to start to bail out because you have to, right? I have a deadline. I have to meet this deadline. Who gets cast off when we have to meet a deadline? The people already in the margins. So AKA those are some of the... Brothers.
I said AKA Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
We got to get rid of that girl. But we're going to keep the Flash.
That's a whole, that's a whole, I am excited for She-Hulk. I have to admit, I know some people are torn, but I believe it starts today. I think it airs today.
It's today.
I'm excited. I want to see how it turns out. She's my favorite. We all have favorites. I thought the sensational She-Hulk run was kind of wild back in the day. It was funny, but I really appreciate some of the more savage stuff that's been coming out recently in the last several years with her storylines. But yeah, so sorry, complete tangent, like a squirrel moment.
That's all right.
But yeah, so these are really some of the things that the businesses can do as a place to start. And it can be challenging. It can feel daunting. It can feel expensive. But if you needed to do a major system upgrade in any other way, whether it was technology, whether it was C-level training, because you're all going to do Lean or Six Sigma, you would invest in it appropriately. You need to invest in all of the people who work for you. And you need to find a way to do that consistently.
Yes.
So again, that accountability piece, which if you look to the people who are already volunteering this information, I promise you they have things to say. Mm-hmm.
Yes, they do.
Such a good conversation. So many things to
I know. Now, to dive a little into your other side, what is your approach for youth leadership development?
Oh, okay. So we're going to get a little spicy, y'all. So our youth leadership program is for folks who are 14 to 24. It is Black, queer, and trans. And
I love that you go up to 24 because so many people cut it off at 18.
Right. We understand the difference between a young adult, a burgeoning adult, youth, and how we want to make sure that the youth are the truth right now if we give them the tools and we give them the opportunity to be independent individuals that we don't control like objects.
Yes.
And so when it comes to youth, we are talking about sovereignty, liberation, individuality, and we are trying to break down stereotypes around what it means to be a certain type of Black person. And we move with a politic that is specifically looking for alternative methods of community accountability, policing, because we know these aren't sustainable as they are right now. There are still people who are existing deeply in the margins. There are people who feel like they can't get justice. And so how do we find other alternatives? Because the ones we have are continually funded, and they're continually funded higher and higher. So how do we build connections with neighborhoods and communities? How do we figure out personal responsibility? How do we develop de-escalation techniques and the ability to do so? And how do we embolden our communication with one another? Because we can't create a safe space because safe spaces aren't really real. It's contextual. Who gets to feel safe in the space and who doesn't? And what we want to create is a space where folks feel courageous enough to speak up and speak out. And we've had some amazing cohorts as a result. They've really generated some great conversations. We bring in topical things, so it isn't just like, what do you think of Beyonce's album, as much as, well, there's geopolitical stuff happening. You don't have to know all of it, but what is your baseline understanding? How could we get everyone in this room to a place where it's conversational? Because these things matter to all of us. And we use an intersectional approach in that we continue to work with other community groups. And we continue to provide opportunities for them to expose themselves to the needs, the struggles, and the day-to-day joy of as many different communities that we have around us as possible, with a focus on being able to help them understand themselves and how to move through the world. Because like I said, we often treat children like objects, right? It comes through a lot in debates around the trans community. You know, youth can't define themselves. They don't know about themselves. And that's really challenging for me to hear, right? Because they do. And if we allow cis children at the age of 8, 9, 6, whatever, to say, I am X, and we don't take that from them, well, then that's asymmetrical, right? We're not responding the same way to everybody. And that isn't to say robust conversation shouldn't be had around these subjects as a culture and community, but it doesn't feel like we start from a yes and place. So that would be another thing that we really bring to the space, is it's a yes and. So yes, we hear you. Yes, we see your space. We are your perception. We are going to hold space for that. And we're going to talk about that with respect. And then we're going to provide other perspectives and other opportunities to think about this differently, not in a way that's telling you how to think as much as it's giving you more practice thinking critically around subjects that may not necessarily come up very often. Like, how often do we get into these conversations with friends, family, or peers in a way that is deep, because through selection bias, most of our friends probably believe similarly to us. They probably do some similar things. And, people are surprised when I say I need something other than current models of incarceration and law enforcement, because they're not helping us. The moment you add melanin into the equation, we struggle, right? We are overrepresented the moment you add melanin into the equation. And I feel like that's a really unfortunate narrative that we've lost control over, because we don't get to have joy, right? People are now understanding, well, we're marginalized. Those folks are having trouble, and I need to be a savior. No more white saviors. Emotional labor strike. We're not doing any more of that. And how we are able to challenge some of these folks to grow a little differently, because we aren't always challenged. You know, like people will talk about a certain kind of challenge. Well, go get a job. Go write for the paper. Like there's some very specific narratives that young people get in terms of how they're supposed to move forward. And it is always in line with what their parents feel, right? Because we control that as adults. That isn't to say there isn't room to grow. But what we are trying to do is providing these young folks a space to exist and think and be and feel and discuss in a way that centers their power, in a way that centers their identity and their experience. So their individuality is highly prized and promoted. And that is what we are trying to cultivate within a space of challenging dialogue.
Yes, learning the difference. Like I saw someone post, there's, people knowing the difference between arguing and having a conversation.
Oh.
It's two different things, and people don't know the difference because they declare they're having a conversation, but they're just arguing to show they're right versus trying to find out what's right.
That dialogue versus debate.
Yes.
Yeah. Like disagreement is not always a bad thing. It helps us to expand our horizons and understand more perspectives and
fear of conflict. Yeah, fear of conflict. I think it's because people struggle. There are a lot of narratives in this country, in this culture, around conflict, and they're usually violent. The most well-known ones are very violent, and so it can be difficult for us to conceptualize disagreement, differences of opinion with, a judgment of a person, right? It comes down to and that's hard. We talk about the political divide and the reasons why it's divided, but we don't have to dialogue, or we don't have to debate with anybody. We can dialogue with whoever we choose, but we don't have to debate our identity or who we are with anybody. We are allowed to close that part of the conversation down. And I feel like that's part of what our culture right now is struggling with, is when one of us says no.
Right.
No, I'm not gonna. It's not my job to explain things, and I'm not a bad person because I don't make it my life to coddle your feelings and help you understand how your behavior is negative. There are other people who are doing that. Please seek them out. Being able to hold our own boundaries and our own identities is really important. It's something we're seeing a lot of women are able to do now, right? I live with a 75-year-old queer femme who remembers when she had to have her brother sign on her credit card for her because she could not have a credit card without a man.
Bank account, everything.
Yes, everything. And she was trying to be independent. And so now we have a lot more independent people. And folks are struggling when marginalized folks say no, because women are not a minority, they're marginalized. They have the planet. So how people are responding to more and more women saying no, and more Black and brown folks saying no, marginalized people, folks who are discriminated against saying no, I'm not going to take it. And it's not my job to be your martyr so that you can make mistakes all over me, and I'm just supposed to say it's okay. Yeah, that's all right.
So they can feel better about themselves.
Like the intent versus impact, I usually break it down into the example of someone spilling water or spilling a bowl of soup. Like, you spill water on somebody. I don't care that in your off time you're a professional juggler and you can juggle chainsaws. That's fantastic. Like, I don't care that you don't feel like you were racist yesterday or last week, or you went to a training seminar for 3 days and now you came back and you've checked all your boxes. That's not real. And I just want to find more opportunities for us to find our reality in a way that is defined by us. I want more of our own narratives. I really want more of them outside of all of the sad stories that we tell. Like, I love Black and brown superhero stories, y'all. Like, I do. I mean, who doesn't like an opportunity to see themselves blown up to that level, right? Because they're these paragons, these little paragons. And most of our opportunities have Black in the name, which was a struggle growing up. It's also why I like Blade. I have always loved Blade. One of the first Marvel movies to really make it. Amun-Ra film.
Established the MCU.
Absolutely. Been to a few midnight showings. I'm that kind of nerd. But looking for opportunity where we can get it, because I also don't want to have to take whatever we can get. That's something our communities also struggle with as well. We'll take whatever we can get and then kind of browbeat or bully each other into, well, we have to accept it. We have to be okay with it. That's the best we're going to get right now. At least somebody's trying. I'm not dissing that somebody's trying.
Right.
I'm asking for options.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm just asking for options. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So what are your top challenges that you see facing our youth today?
One of the biggest ones is censorship and control. We are seeing people going to libraries and getting them defunded. I think one in Michigan was completely defunded. Out of 6,000 titles, 90 of them dealt with queer folk stuff, and they defunded the library over it. They're going after Martin Luther King. They're going after Audre Lorde, and so being able to give them access to our stories, to our information is important. The number of people that I spoke to during the protests, the larger protests here, who didn't know that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, was spoken by a lesbian Black woman who was literally talking about a lack of representation at the time. So making sure that our youth have access to these things is one of the most important, because what we as adults do try and control information for their own sake, for their greater good. We get patronizing in that way. Age appropriate is super real, but I was a very strong reader early on, and trying to tell me what I could or couldn't read was really just going to get me to read the whole banned book list.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Right, and then get confused because I'm like, why is this on here? Okay, Catcher in the Rye, Colden Hallfield, ew. But yeah, so one of the other difficulties is the fact that the resources for youth are also controlled. You can write a grant and you can say that you're going to help youth do X, Y, or Z, but it's still going to be controlled by a human being who has the purse strings.
Right.
Who's going to say, well, you have to vet your story in a certain way. I have to approve of the way you present your life experience. Yeah, that face, Moana, for sure. Yeah, that's a struggle. And honestly, transportation. I know that's like from my community health work days. It's great that we have this youth program or this youth day space. How is somebody getting there?
Right.
Thank you. Especially if like the public transportation system is not efficient, like a lot of places in this country, and then the parents or someone won't take them either.
Right.
Living rural. Yeah. So so I talk about urban and rural environments and him bridging some of that divide. And that's usually a place where people can start to understand how their story or their struggle is bound up in others, because, with another example is gentrification. Rural folks act like they don't understand it, and that it's a good thing that our historic communities are being broken apart. Well, when we talk about where are those people from the city going to move, they're going to move to the suburbs and the exurbs and rural spaces, because that's where they can afford. Property values will rise. You're going to lose the farm, which is something you do understand, right? And so, yeah, helping young folks figure out where we can build some of these bridges and understanding, and that transportation piece, can we get them to those places? Once we get them to those places, how are we supporting them? So food access, food security. I talk a lot about social determinants of health, so food, housing, economic access. And a lot of queer Black youth are either not out at home, or they have complicated relationships with their parents. And so how can we provide a space that is not necessarily an opposite of your home life, but one that feels supportive and builds courageousness in you and confidence in you in a different way? Because young people are constantly demeaned in terms of, you don't know what's best for you. You're not capable of making a decision. Right. You don't know X, Y, or Z. You don't know enough to decide about that. And I feel like that's really detrimental to our young folks. It's not great for building confidence. Right. And all it really does is continue to pressure people into this space where they're comfortable with outside authorities telling them what to do. And most of those authorities are going to be influenced by white culture, white supremacy in this particular space, in this country. So,
so a lot of what we just talked about is, the resources that create these obstacles for our children. one of the things that you also do is you lead a creativity and art program.
Mhm.
Are there ways that the indie comic community can help, your organization or your programs through partnerships?
Absolutely. So we're big fans of the community donation level of things like Kickstarters,
Mm-hmm.
because that allows us to hand books to folks. We have a small library here, so we have young folks who come to our events, and so we give them things to read that aren't going to be the same things they're going to find in a library.
Yes.
And those of us who do things like Kickstarter or Backer Kit, if there's a pledge level where we can donate one, we'll do that, because we want to be supportive of other folks getting access, and this person getting visibility, this creator getting an opportunity to be visible, because I want to pay for as many indie comics as I can. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we'll ever be able to compete with DC or Marvel, but dang it, Image almost did. Like, Image put up a really good
Yes.
fight. I think they just sold off, but no, that was Dark Horse. Sorry. But yeah.
Yeah, I still really like, for me, at least me personally, like Image is my go-to. Especially if I'm at a big con like San Diego. Like,
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm going to indie. I'm into Image, and
Yeah.
it's like a nice blend of like indie and mainstream and like variety of choices and creators.
Yeah, options. It's all about options. I just need more options. And there's already space made for all these big titles, big names, mainstream. Cool.
Right.
Super cool. Let me have something different.
Just how, like, we talked about it on a show. We had a whole panel. We talked about Miss Marvel. Like, how many people were giving bad reviews before the show even came out because it was a brown Indian American girl as the lead, as a teen also. But then when you watch the show, we were talking about how much, even though you see the struggle they went through, they even went through about the history, dealing with how the synagogues deal with, the with the government and everything and all. But then it's like you had your areas of relation, like they actually said, from black and brown households with between 18 and 25 made it number one for screenings, because so many people were watching it. And it's one of those that it's like, finally Marvel has that we're looking for. Are you really going to support it?
Yes, I struggle with that, because like had a lot of like Black Panther runs where they had a lot of good artists, they had some good writers, they weren't getting the traction in the stores that they needed to be sustained. And so now we have like 9 different titles or something like that within that, and it's hard to keep up with. Yeah, I definitely agree that it's all about being able to see ourselves represented, and knowing that the simple fact that we're present is going to cause ire. Like, some people are going to come after us just because it's melanated at all, or it's not centering their story. As much as they tell us, well, it shouldn't matter, right? That it's all white people, because like you can empathize with anything, right? But then they literally can't do it. Can't do it the moment we're on screen.
Or what you're doing is causing division.
Yo, I think they call it like C-level influence or something like that, or director influence now when there's diversity in a show. They just hate it. And I cannot get past feeling like every time I hear white people mad that a character is no longer white, all I see are toddlers screaming about sharing their toys. That's it. That's all I see. You don't want to share your toys and you're mad about it. But when we try and make our own, we don't get enough traction to support it. And that's frustrating, you know?
Or you hear, like, when Black Panther came out, why is there only a couple white people?
Yeah, but with no reflection, no ability to reflect and see that everything looks like them most of the time. I will never have a problem finding a movie full of white people centered around white folks where we are tangential or not included, and folks will think that's okay. Especially if it's this is European. Okay, fam, let's go talk about some other stories then. Like, they're out there. And again, we can't do it on our own. Or they won't let us do it on our own. So we have to develop these other systems to be able to do that. And we have to stay indie as much as we can, because once we're commodified, man, it's tough to come back from that. Those golden handcuffs, because the money looks good, capitalism can get you. Sometimes it's about visibility and you want that. Sometimes it's about circulation and you want that. And sometimes you've just gotten comfortable in bed with people who are not good for the industry as a whole.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Well, of course, our hour went by very quickly. And one thing we tell everybody on the show, they're like, what? The hour's passed? Yes. It goes by so quickly when you're talking about so much. And we definitely have to have you come back on, especially as you're doing more within not only with Blacklily, but also beyond Black and Beyond the Binary Collective, especially if you're doing any virtual events or anything like that, that people that is in our audience can come out and support and everything for it. Moana, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. We had so many more questions, but as Dana said,
an hour is never enough.
But I really enjoyed hearing your perspective tonight, and just you have a very good way about framing a lot of the issues in a constructive way that helps us to create positive change. So thank you for the work that you do, and of course supporting us to help us raise awareness and celebrate our Pacific Islander communities.
Yes,
we definitely appreciate that. And I will probably be in touch because we do have some books to donate, and it sounds like your organization would be a great place to do it.
Exactly.
Fantastic. That's really exciting. That's really exciting. Awesome.
Awesome. Well, tell folks where they can find you on social media, and then
so you can mostly find me through Black and Beyond the Binary Collective. B3C is what we call ourselves for short. We do a series of educational things called Constructing Civic Dialogues. And so if folks are interested in hearing about more things going on in community, things like land and labor acknowledgements, and talking about the liberation, as well as pod mapping, community accountability. So there's a variety of options. Definitely encourage that. If you want to try and find me on the internet, start with blacklilyconsulting.com. And that's going to be the easiest way to continue to keep up with me and where I am. I am somewhat on social media. I know I'm going to sound like a dinosaur in this moment. But as a Black trans femme, are a lot of us who struggle with certain types of visibility. And so I've been somewhat careful with how I move in that way. But check out B3C. It's 2 Black for Binaries on Instagram. Same on Facebook, and you'll be able to find out the things that we're doing, opportunities to engage with us and engage with me directly as well.
Great.
Very awesome. Well, once again, Erin, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for talking, like Moana said, about these very topics that need to be talked about. And of course, like she said, we had so many other questions, but we have to have that as a part 2. Have you come back for part 2? But everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Please join us at 8:30 p.m. Eastern for our next episode that we're going to have as part of our Develop Your Talent series with Sue Ann Hong. Tonight, they're going to talk about individual development. So definitely tune in. She has 3 amazing panelists that will be joining her for this conversation. So please tune in either on our Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, or YouTube. In the comments, engage, ask questions, and that way they can answer some of your questions as you are trying to navigate your individual development, whether it's professionally or personally.
Great.
And with that, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you at 8:30. Everybody have a good evening. Bye. Everyone.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it cedar lands, without any type of payment and no signing off, called themselves a republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if you put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.